Well, it's certainly a natural instinct to search for happiness, but do we know everything about where happiness lies? If you're in an unhappy marriage, does it always lie in divorce? Is divorce, in fact, predominantly the right answer when you think it is? Well, there's a much talked about new study out which says no, and the report is released today by the Institute for American Values. It found no evidence, it says, that people who divorce are on the average happier than people who are unhappy but stay married. So here with us now to talk about it is Linda Wade, lead author of the report, and she is a professor at the University of Chicago teaching courses on family. Also joining us from East Gull Lake, Minnesota is Pepper Schwartz, author of the book Everything You Know About Love and Sex is Wrong. And we also wanted to talk to someone who is a face behind these statistics. Susan Bacot joins us, and she has been married for 9 years, but she and her husband are now planning to get a divorce, and we thought it would be nice to have your eyes and ears on this debate. So let me start with you, Ms. Wade, because I want to understand what your study showed. It showed, as I quote it, and I hope it's right, divorce did not on the whole reduce unhappiness and raise self-esteem. On the whole, on the average.
That's right. If you compare people who were unhappy with their marriage who stayed married and people who were unhappy with their marriage and got divorced, basically you don't improve your emotional well-being on average by divorcing. It's about the same as it is for staying in an unhappy marriage, which, by the way, doesn't tend to stay unhappy.
Doesn't tend to stay. You can say this for a fact.
For sure.
Because you have another statistic which sort of made me start. 2/3 of the people who are unhappy in their marriage, and presumably unhappy enough to think about divorce, to be on the verge of divorce?
Well, they say they're unhappy. When you say, how happy are you with their marriage, with your marriage, they say, I'm not happy.
And you say 5 years later, that's changed.
Right, that 2/3 of them say they're now happy with their marriage.
And what about those who remarry? If you divorce and remarry, are those the happiest of all?
No, they're about the same as the people who stayed married.
All right. Pepper, are you there? And are
Hi.
you listening to this?
I am.
What do you
Definitely.
think? Does this strike you as correct?
No, absolutely not. I've actually looked at their data, and I know this data set because I've worked with it. It's a large national sample. And the fact is that their data shows that divorced people are happier. What they've done is they've put divorced and separated people together. Now, and come up with their conclusions. Separated people are notoriously the least happy of all. They're in transition. The first couple years, even after divorce, makes them unhappier than they will be in the future, and there's plenty of data to support that. So if you take the separated people out of their data, only look at the divorced people, you find, indeed, that divorced people are happier than the people who stayed in the unhappy marriage.
But what
it's
about,
right there in their own data.
What about the findings that there's still a high level of depression and drinking?
Okay, and that one is really discoverable too. They don't have the right answer there. They're misrepresenting their own data. In fact, the people who were depressed and drinking were depressed and drinking before their marriage, much less their divorce. You cannot put it to the divorce. These people were drinking and they had problems. And depression, particularly depression, is not necessarily responsive to either a good or bad marriage. So they were that way and they stayed that way.
Ms. Wade?
I think that that's not accurate. What we looked at is change in depressive symptoms. So it's true, people who are unhappy with their marriage show higher levels of depressive symptoms. It's obvious. But their depressive symptoms don't get better when they get divorced, even if they get remarried.
But what about lumping separated people, notoriously unhappy, separated people, with divorced people?
In fact, we don't do that. We consider separately people who divorced and remarried, who you would expect to be the happiest. They found a new relationship, they went on with their life, but they do no better on average on all these indicators than people who stayed in that marriage that they were previously unhappy with.
Well, let me ask Pepper Schwartz about that. What about the finding that 2/3 of unhappy people, if they stick with it for 5 years, end up happy?
That just doesn't pass the smell test. It really doesn't. Not to all the other research that we've seen, and also everyone's collective impression clinically, and you just as a person. If you thought of all the people you know who've been in long-term unhappy marriages, and 5 years later, have they suddenly turned into happier marriages? Not really. A lot of them get resigned. They justify their choice. They stay there because of the children, or for the matter, because they believe in marriage as an institution and they're going to slog through it. But happier or happy enough to justify it in other people's opinion, no. And when we do look at second marriages, they tend to be happier than first marriages. Not necessarily more stable, but happier. So I think there's conflicting data on that one, for sure.
All right, as we've said, this is a debate, and maybe we can't settle it finally here, but we can settle it, in a sense, emotionally. Susan Baker, as we said, you and your husband were together 9 years. You think if you just stuck it out a few more years, maybe on the other side of that would lie the happiness you seek?
No, I think we tried really hard. We did stick it out. I think when a relationship gets to a point where it's all-consuming, and you can't concentrate on your own interests and passions, it definitely affects your self-esteem and prevents you from pursuing your dreams and from being productive in your life and your career. And so I think a study that encourages people to stay in an unhappy marriage is very dangerous.
Well, but what about the possibility that you get the divorce and you're just as unhappy?
I think a divorce in and of itself is not really the only answer. I think divorce in combination with a lot of self-reflection and looking at the marriage and where you've been and what you've done wrong and maybe why you chose the person you did. I think that's very important, to have a positive attitude and to explore yourself and to look at your own passions and interests. It can be a real time for self-discovery.
So
and
you're going to take a
empowerment.
chance anyway.
Yeah, I mean, in my own experience and the experience of my friends and family members who've been through divorce, it's been a very positive one. I think with the right support, it can be very empowering for a man or a woman. And I'm infinitely happier, and I know my husband is, and we're still good friends. And so, you know, it was a positive experience, and I feel lucky for that. But
All right. Well, Susan, we thank you. As we said, we can't settle it today, but we've raised a lot of the issues you found in studies. And we thank you, Pepper Schwartz, as well. And Good Morning America will be back. Dr. Timothy Johnson will be here. Back pain relief. That should keep a lot of people tuned.